Welcome to the Jboy Show, hosted by Jake Crain, the fastest growing sports show in the nation.
I'm Coach Hugh Freeze.
This is Super Bowl champion Brandon Graham.
Hey, this is DJ Shockley, and you're watching.
And thanks for watching the Jboy Show.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for hopping in again. Another edition of the Jboy Show. Very excited to get to our interview with Tony Barnhart, one of the best covering college sports, college football. Got some great talk with him. Georgia, Kirby Smart. Going to talk some Auburn. You know how we do. Going to mix it up. But first, I want to give a shout out to our partners at betonline.ag, where the online casino is always open. We got Major League Baseball, NBA playoffs, football's coming down the pipe. Any sport, they're going to have numbers on it, whether you play the over-unders, team props, player props, parlays, straight ups, however you get down, head over to betonline.ag today and tell them that Jboy sent you. And my take today before we get to the interview is this, and there's a lot of talk about Georgia, obviously, with what they've added through the portal, them getting over the hump, no pun intended, and winning the national championship, one they haven't won since 1980. But there's a narrative that Kirby Smart, until he wins a national championship, is Mark Richt. And the numbers just don't suffice that. And I would say to Georgia fans, I'd be very careful. And I know you're hungry for a national championship. I get it. And you should have won one by now. I totally get it. But I would caution Georgia fans on being too quick to throw Kirby under the bus if he doesn't win it this year. And again, I understand the frustration. But it is going to happen for Kirby Smart. And the differences I see in Kirby Smart and Mark Richt, not that Mark Richt wasn't a great coach, did great things for Georgia, was successful there outside of winning the whole thing. But Mark Richt kept Georgia in the top 10 consecutively week-wise. The most weeks he had was 10. For Kirby Smart, up until last year, I believe it was going in the Mississippi State game, and I've said this multiple times on the show, he had Georgia ranked in the top 10 for 45 straight weeks. We're talking about Georgia every year now as a legitimate national championship contender in the handful and the group of teams that have made the playoff, the 5 or 6 that are really competing at the top. You look at the recruiting classes, and Mark Richt recruited well, but this is on a different level. And also, you know, Kirby got there in 2015. And I understand people that say Mark Richt had to deal with Nick Saban. He did, but not at this level. And the machine wasn't built to this level from a depth and roster standpoint the way Nick Saban has dominated. Kirby Smart's going to do it. In my opinion, Kirby Smart's going to be the first assistant to beat Nick Saban. And I think it happens this year in the SEC championship game. And I think Georgia, in my opinion, is the favorite to win the national championship. And there's going to be a ton of pressure on Kirby. There is at places like Georgia. There's chirping that if he doesn't win it this year, what are you going to do, fire him? What are you going to fire him? With the record he has, with the way they're recruiting, with the momentum that Georgia has. So Georgia fans that want to compare Mark Richt and Kirby Smart, I guess I understand the theory of what you're thinking if you're just looking at national championships, and we know how important that is. But at the end of the day, this man is setting Georgia up to do it, not only one year, but could do it multiple times. And if you get too frustrated and you get too greedy over the course of time before Nick Saban sails off into the sunset, you are going to regret it. Ask Tennessean Philip Fulmer. Let's get to the interview with Tony Barnhart, one of the best. All right, we're going to jump into an interview right now with one of my favorite guys to have on here, college football analyst at the SEC Network, contributor to TMGcollegesports.com. One of my favorite guys to follow when it comes to college football. Has been doing it for a while. Not trying to age you, Tony, but you're a guy that you know I grew up reading and really enjoy your takes. And it's such a crazy time now as we enter June. But Tony, it's great to have you on the show, Mr. Tony Barnhart.
Well, thank you, Jake. It's an interesting time, and I just get ready to put up a column for TMG College Sports. I believe that this will be the craziest June that college football's ever had.
Well, let's go ahead and kick it off. I mean, we're recording this on June 2nd, June 1st. We have recruiting open back up. Thank goodness. I'm so happy for the kids and the recruits and their families being able to actually go into facilities and see what they'd be getting their son into and daughter when it comes to that sport. But Georgia, and that's where I want to start, Tony. A lot of people talked about the secondary being a kind of a weakness of the team going into this year. You look at the transfer portal, they bring Darion Kendrick in from Clemson, a guy that's got high upside. You look at Turnage from Alabama, and then you look at Eric Gilbert, getting him yesterday as long as he's eligible and can handle stuff off the field. Is this Georgia's best chance ever to win a national championship?
Well, it's their best chance in a long time. They've had some outstanding teams. Obviously, the 2017 was right there knocking on the door. Yep. The 28 team probably should have beaten Alabama, to credit Alabama in the SEC championship game, they came back there. Those were teams that were capable, but couldn't, for whatever reason, get it done. So this is a team that, it's fascinating to watch what Georgia is going to do with the transfer portal, to watch what the Alabamas of the world do with the transfer portal, because they're going to use it to fill positions of need and strengthen positions. And that's exactly what Georgia's done in the last few days.
Yeah, and anybody that thought that the transfer portal would increase parity in college football, I'm going to go ahead and tell you, guys like Nick Saban and Kirby Smart and Jimbo and all these guys, they're going to be ahead of the curve. And they've got the most resources and advantages. And, I mean, you're able to go add a Henry To'oTo'o to Alabama, that surgical precision in the roster that are going to really help some of these teams. And, look, I've made the argument, I've said it in my takes, that it's going to be really hard to build a culture and foundation if you rely on the transfer portal too much. That sliding glass door typically doesn't translate into being able to sustain success, long-term success, that is. But if you're able to go out and get guys in certain spots, I mean, Tony, you can elevate your team from a pretender to a legitimate contender really fast.
Well, one of the things the transfer portals is going to do is the elite programs, the established programs, are going to use it the way they used to use junior colleges.
Yes.
Used to be a Nick Saban or a Georgia. They would not go out and get a junior college player unless there was a specific need for a guy to come in and play right away. And I think that's what they're going to do with the transfer portal. You're going to assess your overall team needs. Where do we need either a starter or we need somebody that's a quality backup? And that's what they're going to use the transfer portal for, as you called it, to surgically determine where the needs are to give this team the best chance to win.
Without a doubt, and you're really just kind of adding a steroid shot to your team. But, Tony, speaking on Georgia, and I'm going to get to the rest of the East. We'll slide over to the West here in a second. You know, for the people that make the comparison between Kirby and Mark Richt if he doesn't win it this year, I don't buy into that narrative. I guess I can understand the theory behind it. I talked about that in my monologue as we opened the show. But I do want to caution Georgia fans on chirping too much, even if Kirby doesn't win it this year, because he has built a monster in Georgia, and they are set up to have a chance to do this over and over and over again. You just don't want to make a mistake. Ask Philip Fulmer in Tennessee.
Yeah, look, I've had a lot of people come up to me and ask me, well, what if Kirby doesn't win it this year? I said, if he doesn't win it this year, he'll be back next year in the conversation to win the national championship. Why? Because like Nick Saban's done in Alabama with tremendous success, Kirby Smart has built a program at Georgia where they expect to be in the top 5 in recruiting every year. And it'll be an upset if they're not. And as long as you do that, you're going to be knocking on the door. You're going to be one of those teams that are part of that discussion. But this idea, and I think I said this on Paul Feinbaum's show, is that this idea that there's a window and there's a limited window, and if you don't do it in that window is going to close. The window is only going to close if you quit recruiting at a high level. Mm-hmm. As long as you're recruiting at a high level, the window will not close. It's just a question of being in position and making the handful of plays you got to make to win the national championship. So no, I don't buy this idea that, Kirby Smart, if he doesn't win it now, he's never going to win it. Yeah. That's silly.
Yeah. And I want to make sure I'm not taking a shot at Mark Richt either. Mark Richt had a great career, did a lot of great things at Georgia, is beloved. But Kirby has elevated Georgia's status. I mean, he really has. And again, Georgia is a program that's done a ton. I know they don't have as many national championships as the fans want. But looking at what Kirby does now, we only talk about Georgia with the handful of these other teams, with the Alabamas, with the Ohio States, with the Clemsons, having a chance to actually make the playoff in the end. And like I said, I think Georgia fans need to make sure, while the expectation should be high, Tony, the standard should be high with the way they've recruited. I think you have to understand what Kirby has done and appreciate that. And I think you're exactly right.
Yeah, it's right there on paper, Jacob. Look, 2016 is first year. That's a transition year. 2017, they were within one play of winning the national championship, win the SEC. 2018, they got a 2-touchdown lead on Alabama, let it slip away. So they were knocking right there. Think different. 2019 they got caught short at the quarterback position, but then they figured it out in 2020. So I think they're moving in the right direction. It's just this narrative that seems to come out that if you don't do it now, you're never going to do it, and that's not the way college football works.
That's exactly right. That's a great way to put it and kind of encapsulate that and put a cap on that. But looking at the rest of the East, I think there's some really interesting storylines in the East when you look at Florida with what they've lost, what Mark Stoops has built at Kentucky, what Eli Drinkwitz is building at Missouri, I think that second tier in the SEC East is going to get pretty interesting. I have Kentucky finishing second. Kind of, how do you see Florida in the mix in all this? It's really Georgia and a wide gap between everybody else. But how do you see Florida compared to Kentucky and Missouri this season in the East?
Right now I've got Florida at number 2 just because their overall talent. They lost a ton. Let's face it. And Emory Jones has got to prove to me that he's an every down quarterback, and he could do it. I mean, Dan Mullen has a great track record of taking the skill set of the quarterback in front of him and maximizing the skill set. If he can do that with Emory Jones, I think they can finish second. But I really like Kentucky. I think Mark Stoops has done a tremendous job. I remember sitting in his office 6 years ago, him wondering could he even get Kentucky to a bowl because they had been so close and came up a game short. And now they've been to 5 straight bowls, which has never happened in Kentucky history. And they've recruited well. Now, have they been a top 10 class? No, that's not what they do. They recruit very good players and develop them into great players.
Yeah.
And like Josh Allen. I mean, nobody wanted Josh Allen. And so I just like what they've done there. So I think they've got a real shot to challenge Florida for that second spot. And I do like what Eli Drinkwitz has done second year with Blaze Lack as his quarterback. Mm-hmm. It's clear that he's building a program there. So I think that they could be in the mix. Right now, I got Florida because of their overall depth of talent, but it won't surprise me if Kentucky or Missouri slips up and takes that spot.
Yeah, well, I laugh, Tony, and shoot, I'm old enough to remember when Kentucky and Missouri were just afterthoughts. Now I'm looking at week 2, and Kentucky's playing Missouri. I'm looking at that, Tony. That's a can't-miss game if you're looking at the second tier of the East, and that's just a shout-out to Mark Stoops and Eli Drinkwitz, who I think is one of the best schematical guys, especially before the ball is snapped in the country, being able to find out what you're in from a motion and formational standpoint. But before I slide to the West, 2 new hires in the East. Shane Beamer at South Carolina, a guy we've had on this show. I like Shane a lot. I know he hasn't been a head coach, but he learned from one of the best. He's been in a lot of places and understands it. And then Josh Heupel at Tennessee. That's a totally different situation with the NCAA kind of breathing down your neck. Right now, would you rather be Shane Beamer or Josh Heupel? Let me put it better. Would you rather be a South Carolina fan or a Tennessee fan over the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, I think I'm probably a Tennessee fan because the overall program. I mean, I think Shane Beamer's. I watched Shane Beamer grow up in this business. I knew him when he was just a small guy, but he's worked for Frank Beamer, a Hall of Fame coach. He's worked for Steve Spurrier, a Hall of Fame coach. He's been all over this conference, working in Mississippi State and these other places. He's going to get it done. But their roster at South Carolina, when you look at their roster, they got a lot of work to do, and they've got to elevate the. Was under Coach Spurrier, which was the reason that Shane Beamer was hired, by the way.
Yeah.
Shane Beamer was in charge of recruiting for a good portion of Steve Spurrier's time there. Josh Heupel, my concern there is not as much as the NCAA, although that's always an issue, is that we know what Josh Heupel wants to do.
Yeah.
Right? He has a clear track record of what he wants to do. What we don't know is if he's got a quarterback in that room who can do it. And when you bring in a transfer quarterback from Michigan this late in the game, that can't be a good sign. Yeah. So Josh Heupel's got to find one of these quarterbacks to execute his offense, and if they do, they'll be a fun team to watch. But from an overall talent standpoint, they're not Georgia, Florida, Kentucky, or Missouri. They're just not.
No, I agree. And I'm interested to see how that offense translates to the SEC because it's already hell to play defense the way Lane Kiffin runs it at Ole Miss. Josh Heupel does it in warp speed. I'm surprised that NASA's not trying to get him to come up with a warp drive to get us, light years away quicker the way he runs that offense. And it'd be different if Dylan Gabriel had transferred from UCF and went with him. That'd be a different thing. But you're right. If you don't have a quarterback that can operate that system, and let's be honest, Joe Milton from Michigan isn't exactly Drew Brees when it comes to accuracy, or he'd still be at Michigan. So I think that's a great point. Speaking about great points, if you are trying to find a way to get your child recruited, if you're the prospect or a friend that you're trying to get recruited to the next level, you need to download the Dynasty U app right now. You can get it at the Google Play Store, anywhere you get your apps. It's like LinkedIn for recruits. It's got everything. It's concise in one place. You don't have to email the coach 20,000 times. It's easy for them. It's easy for you, and it's free to download, from grades to highlights, social media, any link you want to put in there to get eyes on your son, daughter, doesn't matter. You need to download the Dynasty U app. It's great stuff, and it won't be free for long. It's the LinkedIn for high school recruits, and it's a great idea from some people that you can really trust. That's the Dynasty U app. We're here with Tony Barnhart, college football analyst at SEC Network, contributor as well at tmgcollegesports.com. Love having this conversation, talking some SEC football. Tony, we'll blink our eyes and he'll be here tomorrow. We're going to have SEC Media Days, which we're going to be at. Got a big announcement coming on that front as well. But looking at the West, and this to me is the juiciest, even with what Alabama's done. You can't bet against Alabama. I've picked them to win the West. I think you'd be nuts. They don't rebuild, they reload. We know that. But looking at the West as in total, you look at some of the teams that have typically been in the bottom, and you look at Arkansas with Sam Pittman building off year one, Lane Kiffin building off year one, actually adding some guys to a personnel defense that was probably the worst, and it's just the truth from a personnel standpoint in Power 5 football last year, in my opinion. When you look at the West outside of Alabama, who are a couple teams in your mind, I'm sure Texas A&M is going to be one of them, that you see are trying to make a move into relevancy to maybe chip off the block a little bit at what Nick Saban's doing? Is there a couple that come to your mind that are heading that way?
Well, I think the debate after Alabama is going to be Texas A&M and LSU.
I agree.
Now, Texas A&M, obviously, Kellen Mond has used his 9 years of eligibility, and so he's gone. And so which of these two young quarterbacks he got can really do, particularly early on, because Jimbo Fisher is the guy. It takes a little while to settle in with Jimbo and get used to Jimbo. Jimbo can be a little intense during the course of the game, and the quarterback's got to learn how to deal with that. He's got a couple of guys that have great athletic ability, and they've got Isaiah Spiller coming back, and I just think their overall talent depth from 3-4 years of recruiting on the Jimbo Fisher is going to start to pay off. But I keep my friends that keep telling me, I said, man, your LSU is going to bounce back big after what happened last season, because they made some changes on the coaching staff, figured out the defense under Bo Pelini was just a disaster.
Yeah. And
so they made a change there. And so athletically, they're going to be six. So I think it's going to be very interesting between those two schools. After that, I think you get the rest. I love what Lane Kiffin's doing. They're always going to have quarterbacks and wide receivers. I think Matt Corral is one of the most underrated quarterbacks in all of college football. He can make every single throw you want to make. How much do they miss Elijah Moore, a great receiver, or do they have more guys that can just plug in there? So that and the defense, you were being kind when you said it was awful.
It was
It was beyond awful. It was almost dead last in the world. Mm-hmm. And with Kiffin, hey, just get him 1 or 2 stops, 1 or 2 extra possessions. That's all you need to do. And if they can do that, then maybe Kiffin and Ole Miss make some noise.
Yeah, without a doubt. And you look at guys that are returning. I'm big on Braylon Sanders. Thought he had a great spring. I think him and Matt Corral got good chemistry. Boa at tight end. And Tony, you said it. Lane will always be fine at quarterback in the skill position. I love what Ely brings as a pass catcher out of the backfield for Ole Miss. That's a big part of what Lane's doing there, and a way to hurt better personnel if you're going to get some on the offensive side of the ball. It's hard to account for that guy. But speaking about LSU, and Tony, listen, I got them and A&M going 5-3 in the SEC. I've got LSU beating A&M the last week of the season at home to get that second slot. And I've been saying, I think LSU does better as an outsider. I think Ed Orgeron is a master motivator. I think they're going to use this past season to really vault them this season because, the offseason videos in the locker room and this, that, and the other. And they have talent on that roster. They've got talent all over that roster. Ed Orgeron and that staff can recruit, and I like the new hires. My biggest thing on LSU is, because there's no coach really in the SEC on the hot seat, or, maybe you could say Ed Orgeron a little bit, like just a tad, even though they won it in 2019. But when you have something like that, Tony, I think they have to start off well. I think they got to go beat UCLA, because if they start off struggling, you're going to start to hear that chirping coming from Death Valley, especially after Ed Orgeron didn't help himself, saying he didn't interview Bo Pelini and he didn't watch a ton of film. If you're going to say that, you better start off good in this next year, or it could snowball on you.
Well, and they absolutely should win at UCLA.
I agree.
Okay? They're a better football team, and going on the road is no big deal when you play in the SEC. So, I think they absolutely they got to win that game to get started. No question.
Yeah, I'm going to find it interesting. And again, you look at their schedule. I think it kind of lays out pretty good. Now, Tony, do you see anybody as we're kind of wrapping this down? Do you see anybody beating? Will Alabama lose an SEC game this year? We've gotten to this point, Tony. We've gotten to this point. Will Alabama lose an SEC game this year, outside of the championship game? Let's say before the championship game.
If they don't lose at Texas A&M, they're not going to lose.
Yeah.
Okay.
I
just don't. You sit there and look at the schedule and. Maybe that's where they get tripped up, but if they don't lose that one, I don't see them lose.
Yeah, it's like that show on ABC. This is us. This is us now. Will Alabama lose an SEC game? That's what Nick Saban's built. But I do want to ask you, Tony, what do you think about Brian Harsin so far at Auburn? Thought they've done well in the portal. Looks like he's bringing some accountability back, kind of that, for lack of a better term, that tough-ass nature that you're used to getting from Auburn, especially up front. And if you look at the way he's recruiting, and I'm going to do a monologue on this, he's going after these bigger guys. I think he's on the offensive line. I think he's doing that to combat the way defenses are now defending spreads. Look at the size of the middle linebackers and the interior linebackers in this league. I think that's a way he's going. Do you think that's a smart avenue?
I think it is a smart way to go about it. And the thing that impresses me with Brian Harsin, look, got a great track record at Boise. We understand that. But the challenge coming into the Southeastern Conference is always to do two things. One, surround yourself with people who understand the conference and what it's like. And that means they can go out and recruit.
Yes.
Adding Mike Bobo, I thought was a stroke of genius, a guy who's been a very successful offensive coordinator in this conference. Adding Derek Mason on the defensive side of the ball was very, very important. Understands what big-time defense is all about. So I thought that was very good. The question about Auburn is pretty simple. Can Mike Bobo coach Bo Nix to get anywhere near his potential? All right. Bo Nix has been a very inconsistent quarterback in his entire time at Auburn. Had flashes of brilliance. The guy's a good athlete. He can do things. He's had moments when he's played well. But when they go on the road in some of the big games, he is very inconsistent at best. Mike Bobo is good at coaching quarterbacks from the feet up, all the way up, footwork, throw in motion, decision-making, the most important thing of all. Mike Bobo is really good at developing quarterbacks. Can he work his magic, or does somebody else have to come in and take that position like TJ Finley from LSU?
Yeah. What did you think about that TJ Finley transfer, Tony, while we're on it? I mean, to me, I look at it and it really smoothed out the quarterback room from a future standpoint. Now, instead of having a junior, a true freshman, because Grant Lloyd can't help Auburn. He can't throw Auburn to a win. He just can't do it. To me, this is a huge move for 2022. If something happens to Bo Nix, now you're not relying on a redshirt freshman and a true freshman. You actually have a guy with experience because, again, roster structure is a big deal.
Right. And it was clear, as coaches always say, hey, guys can read a depth chart, all right? TJ Finley was number 3 in the depth chart, on the depth chart after Miles Brennan and Max Johnson. He was going to be the number 3 quarterback, and that's why the transfer was made. So that helps Auburn out a lot, and I'll be anxious to see, how they use Finley. I mean, he's a big kid with a big arm and had good moments for LSU. Then he had a bunch of bad moments for LSU. So the guy's obviously has ability. Can you coach him to be more consistent?
Yep, and it goes into that same Bo Nix realm. And like you said, Mike Bobo, if one guy can do it, with his track record, he's able to do it. They got to shore up that offensive line and the tackle spots. But my last question, Tony, for you, when you look at the college football playoff, and I know we could spend 30 minutes on this, do you think expanding to 8, because I believe expanding to 8, nothing further than that, and the slippery slope argument is a good one. Do you think the playoff should expand to 8? And if not, why?
I do. And this is a change for me because for the longest time, I have said, 4 is the right number. You don't want to get bigger than that. It'll water down the regular season. But two numbers I want you to keep in mind. We've had 7 years of the college football playoff. That's 28 total teams.
Yep.
The 28 total teams that have been invited to the college football playoff, 22 of those come from 5 different schools.
Yep.
The 4 that played this year plus Oklahoma, 22 of 28 have come from 5 schools. That's an issue. The other issue, and this is something that I'm just learning as we go along, there is a reason while you see the same cast of characters in the recruiting wars.
Yep.
Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, Georgia, et cetera, because those schools that have a legitimate chance, we're talking about a legitimate chance now.
Can go in that living room, can go in that recruit's living room.
And sit in there and go, look, you want to play in the college football playoff, right? Well, then you need to come to our place. These other places you're looking at, they got no shot, and we've got the track record
exactly
to prove it. And that concentrate, the analogy I made with somebody, it's like the incumbency in politics.
Mm-hmm.
If you're an incumbent, you have a decided advantage over the challenger, and it's hard to break in. Well, that's what this is like.
Yep.
Once you've been one of those chosen few, it is hard for another team to crack in. So I think you got to expand it. You got more and more guys who are opting out of bowl games and who are not engaged at the end of the year. I just think we need more teams, more schools, more parts of the country involved for the overall health of college football. So I've changed my mind. I'm willing to go to 8.
Tony, I just want to tell you, I have been screaming that for the last 2 months, almost exactly the way that you just put it. And you're exactly right. I mean, we had a debate show. I had Josh Pate on, who I love. I love having Josh on. He always has great thoughts. And it was to expand or not to expand. And that's the exact reason. It's recruiting. And I'm all for meritocracy, and I do not want to punish success. I think you could have put 30 teams in the playoff last year. Alabama still would have won it and still would have won it going away. But now over time, you will be able to have more recruiters be able to go in the living room and say, listen, your child will be on the biggest stage, in front of the biggest eyes, because this all goes to the draft. That's what it's about. It's about trying to put their kid in the best position to get drafted. That's what recruiting is nowadays. Tony, I could not agree with you more. That's why I love having you on, man. You have great takes. Tell everybody where they can find you on social media, where they can find your content, because look, man, and I'll be the first to say it, you're one of the kings of college football, brother, and I appreciate you.
Well, I appreciate that. And on Twitter, we're at Mr. CFB. And TMGcollegesports.com. We're under the SI umbrella. You can go to si.com/college/TMG, and you could get us there. And we're just hanging out. One last thing I'm going to share with you.
Go ahead, Tony. Anything, brother. Go ahead.
Don't be surprised. Just remember the old Tony told you this.
Okay.
Don't be surprised that when we get down to the nitty-gritty about expansion, that there's not a strong move to go to 12. And I was very skeptical of this, but somebody talked to me who I trust a whole lot. And the reason is this: with 8, if you have 5 automatic bids, Notre Dame gets in, that's 6. You got 2 slots left. What do you do with the group of 5, if anything? And if you put them in there, now you're down to 1.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, the Texas A&Ms of the world, or the second place team in the ACC, it is tough. And if you go to 12, that solves a lot of the problems. And oh, by the way, you make a lot more money. So,
and see, well, that's why I'm shocked they haven't done it, because we all know this is about the bottom line. And I think double the bowls, double the sponsors, double the money. I'm not, the Wolf of Wall Street, but I can put 2 and 2 together to realize it makes 4. And really my theory on it, Tony, not to be too long-winded, is I think we should have a top 25 for the Power 5. And a top 25 for the group of 5. And you take the team that finishes number 1 in that group of 5 and you put them as the 8th seed. And see, Notre Dame, you're right, is the big wrench in this. They need to get their ass in a conference, or they need to literally go in the corner and sit in timeout for a couple years because they just get in the play. I mean, literally, I even think some Notre Dame fans are tired of it. I mean, it's the same story over and over and over again. And they were in a conference, did great in the ACC. I thought it was a great look. But if they want to be independent, they should Notre Dame is the biggest wrench, and they don't ever win it. So I'm with you. It's very interesting. I like it at 8. And Tony, I'm going to remember, we're going to save this clip. And if it goes to 12, I'm going to give you credit, man. I'm going to throw it out there.
Well, I was very skeptical of it, but now I think I thought it was impossible. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm just saying that I just think it's now possible.
Yeah. So it'll be in the conversation now legitimately.
I think so.
Wow. Well, Tony Barnhart breaking a little news right there. Tony, like I said, brother, I appreciate it. Everybody go to tmgcollegesports.com. Check out Tony's stuff. He also contributes to the SEC Network, one of the most knowledgeable guys, not just about the SEC, but college football landscapes, the mechanism of how this all works. Tony, I appreciate you, my friend.
All right, you bet.
All right. We appreciate you as well. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Head over to thejboyshow.com. Grab some merch. Check out our sponsors, Dynasty U, Bet Online, Pro U. Got a ton more coming in, some big announcements. It's been another edition of the Jboy Show with Mr. College Football Tony Barnhart. And like JT Daniels throwing a vertical to Eric Gilbert, we're gone.
The Jboy Show is produced by David Cohn, Technical Director Dave Hammock, Creative Director David Culbertson, Audio Engineer Feyzan Shareef, Production Assistants Blaine Crain and Kyle Orr, Executive Producers Jake Crain, Vince Thompson, Steve Chamberlain, and David Cohn. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and visit our website, thejboyshow.com, for updates regarding our newest apparel and merch designs. Win the water cooler with the Jboy Show.